This video is not intended to be a rip-off of the Birdman or any other YouTuber who sins CinemaSins. It is simply a parody video where I would like to share my own thoughts about what I feel is wrong with this particular video made by CinemaSins. Thank you. I'm giving you 15 sins straight away for sinning this movie.
This movie exists.
Ah yes, the classic "this movie exists" sin. While you're right in saying that there is another movie with the same story, this is supposed to be a more faithful adaptation of the book, which is why it was made. And given the sin, it is clear that you don't know that, which frustrates me. Also, this first sin is going to tell me that this guy is not going to consider the book at all throughout this video. I know he doesn't care about books, but I do, and whether you like it or not, I'll be referencing the book several times throughout this video. Anyway, here's a sin for not considering the book.
26 seconds of snow goes.
Saying snow goes instead of logos. Also, these are just regular logos against a snow background, so what you should really say here is logos against a snow background. Also, this movie showed 2 logos in 26 seconds, which is better than most movies you sin. So I feel like nowadays you're so used to sinning movies for showing logos that you just do it for any movie, regardless of how long the logos lasted for.
Man, can this beginning be any more Harry Potter?
This beginning is nowhere near Harry Potter, and I feel you know that. Come on.
Over 3.5 minutes of confection conception opening credits. If I wanted to know how chocolate was born, I'd take a trip to Hershey, Pennsylvania.
By showing this intro, they don't want us to know how chocolate is born, because from what I know, this is not realistic. By showing this intro, they're setting up the mood for the movie and getting us involved in the story, and they do that brilliantly. For that reason, this should not be a sin.
Story of an ordinary little boy named Charlie Bucket.
Wonkeration.
Wonkeration.
Evening, Buckets.
Evening.
Movie pays homage to the original film's 4-person bed.
You're saying that by having the 4-person bed, it's paying homage to the original film, but actually it's paying homage to the book, which you obviously don't care about.
An awesome image, but entirely impractical. Where did Grandpa Joe and Grandpa George even put their legs? And do we even want to know?
Asking a question and then asking if it's best if you don't know the answer to it. If you're going to ask if it's best if you don't know the answer to a question, why ask the question in the first place? I'm just saying it feels weird to do that. Also, I'm quite sure this bed is wide enough for their footing arrangement to be like this, although I'm not certain about this. You guys decide whether this is a sin.
I saw Willy Wonka with my own 2 eyes. I used to work for him, you know.
You did.
Charlie's been building this exact scale replica of the f***ing chocolate factory for who knows how long, but Grandpa never found out that he worked there until now?
Oh, I don't know, maybe he was waiting until Charlie was old enough. Sometimes parents don't tell you certain things because they wait until you're old enough. And even when you're old enough, they probably don't tell you certain things. Like, I can imagine your parents never told you that trains don't have seatbelts, given that you made this sin in your Polar Express video.
There are no seatbelts on the Polar Express.
Willy Wonka began with a single store on Cherry Street.
Grandposition.
Grandposition. Seriously, that's the 3rd time you've made up a word in this video. Also, if you're going to complain about the fact that Grandpa Joe is telling this story to Charlie, find a better way for him to tell the story. If you can't, then don't make this sin.
The man was a genius.
If he can do the we've seen so far, I think the word Grandpa Joe is looking for is wizard, or based on the way Depp plays the character, possibly Satan?
No. Grandpa Joe used the right word.
Goober started making an ice cream that would never melt.
So wait, the not melting ice cream was actually invented and sold? And Grandpa Joe shouldn't be talking about it as if it's some big revelation.
If you're referring to the fact that Charlie doesn't know about the non-melting ice cream, I have a possible explanation for this. After Wonka closed his factory, he probably stopped selling the non-melting ice cream, and that's why Charlie doesn't know about it.
But then, who's running the machines?
Nobody knows, Charlie. It certainly is a mystery.
Not as big of a mystery as how no one ever told Charlie any of these stories before.
In a way, you already made this sin.
I'd give anything in the world just to go in one more time and see what's become of that amazing factory.
Grandpa Joe was foreshadowing so hard right here, he might start smelling toast.
What's wrong with foreshadowing? Grandpa Joe doesn't know that there's going to be golden tickets, he just wants to go inside the factory, and there's nothing wrong with that.
So they just eat and go to bed? No one gets bathroom breaks? All 4 of them are bedpanning it?
Come on, do you really think they're bedpanning it? Why do you assume certain things just based on the fact that we don't see things happen?
Also, this all seems like strange motivation for something that hasn't even happened yet. Charlie's family seems to be creating this goal for Charlie to get in Wonka's factory even before the golden ticket news has been announced.
No, they're not creating the goal for Charlie to get inside the factory before the news is announced. They're simply giving him hope, and I think that's nice given that they're a family living in poverty.
Indeed, that very night.
Charlie died from severe hypothermia from a gaping hole in the roof mere inches from his bed.
I know quite a lot about hypothermia. I've done first aid, and while I agree that there is a risk of hypothermia here, given that Charlie is sleeping fully clothed and covering himself with a blanket, there's little to no chance that he's going to die of hypothermia. If he starts feeling the cold, he can just warm himself up with the blanket he has.
I dig a good Danny Elfman score as much as the next guy, but sometimes I get the feeling he's just been using variations on the Men in Black score for every movie since 1997.
This music is good, and I feel like this should not be a sin.
So dozens of people just happen to be converging on this poll at the exact same time? Were they all just there for the every second Thursday telephone pole snow orgy and happen to find this message from Wonka?
Before coming into this video, I somehow knew you were going to comment on this, but I'm here to tell you that what's happening here could happen in real life. These people are all gathering around this telephone pole because they see something that is out of the ordinary, that being the poster. I've watched enough reality shows to know that when something happens that is out of the ordinary, people usually crowd around it. As for them being there at the exact same time, they are all leaving their houses to go to work and school at the exact same time, and that's when they see the poster. So all in all, this is something that could happen in real life.
Dear people of the world.
The world? So did the delivery boys ride those Vespas around the entire world to post these notices in one night? What kind of Santa sleigh bull is that?
Does anyone even need me to say what's wrong with this sin? I'm sure most of you have already figured out what's wrong with the sin, but in case you haven't, I'll allow you to figure it out through a pop quiz. So pop quiz people who haven't figured out what's wrong with this sin, Jeremy either A, has never heard of a plane before, B, thinks planes don't exist in this universe, C, thinks Wonka didn't use planes to deliver posters to other countries, or D, is not bothering to come up with proper sins for this movie. I'll allow the people who haven't figured out what's wrong with this sin to decide which one of those four they think it is, but I'm sure most of you already know what's wrong with it. And I honestly can't believe I'm sinning this guy for being so stupid that he actually thinks that these guys traveled all the way around the world.
Also, where did that massive staff come from? They're not Oompa Loompas, but Wonka trusted them to deliver all these notices, and the chocolates with the golden tickets, even though he swore off humanity years ago.
I'm also confused as to where some of the stuff came from, but I can tell you that not all of the people who delivered these posters are his staff.
One of these children shall receive a special prize beyond anything you could ever imagine.
You're giving them the factory, right? I think you may be selling my imagination short, Wonka, because I totally just pulled off imagining that.
I'm willing to bet that the only reason you can pull off imagining it is because you know what's going to happen.
Candy bars may be anywhere, in any shop, in any street, in any town, in any country, in the world.
As long as the 5 winners can speak English for the movie's sake.
English is the most spoken language in the world, so yeah, it's more than likely that the finders of the golden tickets will speak English.
I get it. Kid's fat and loves chocolate. But you're telling me his mother wouldn't clean the chocolate off his face before he goes in front of the cameras?
This is supposed to be characterization. Augustus still has chocolate on his face because it is supposed to show that he is a greedy boy. And his mother doesn't clean it because it shows that she doesn't care about it either. So yeah, you're sinning characterization.
That man spoils his daughter, and no good ever comes from spoiling a child like that.
Someone hasn't been keeping up with the Kardashians.
This sin has absolutely nothing to do within this movie.
Altogether, we're 381 years old. We don't wait.
Damn, that was either some quick math by Grandpa Joe, or he's been creepily monitoring this total for a while now.
He could have been monitoring this total. All he does is stay in bed the whole day, and you can get bored by doing that. So yeah, he could have been monitoring the total.
What's the point of this tension-filled fake-out reveal? Is there a single human watching this movie that doesn't know that Bucket Boy is going to eventually get a ticket?
This fake-out reveal is for drama. Movies do this all the time. They want us to think that he's going to get a ticket here, and then be disappointed when he doesn't.
You ungrateful little butt.
Jesus, does Mr. Buckets have Beats by Dre sound-canceling abilities in his hands? Charlie should still be able to hear at least some of Grandpa George's tapestry of profanity.
That's the joke. This silent ranting is supposed to be a joke.
Oh, for the love of Roald Dahl, how many times do we need to go through this disappointment nonsense?
The answer to your question is twice. Also, you're saying this as if you don't do it yourself, but I can recall several instances of you repeating sins in your videos.
We spent the first 30 minutes of this movie on golden ticket fake-outs, poverty porn,
Did you honestly just say poverty porn? That's a sin if ever I've seen one.
and being narrated at. Can we get to some chocolate factoring already?
The problem with this sin is that here you're complaining about the fact that we're not in the factory, but then later when we're in the factory you complain about it too. You can either complain about us not being in the factory, or you can complain about us being in the factory. You cannot do both, not even if you're CinemaSins.
One Wonka with the scrumptious fudge manna delight, please.
Charlie finds $10 in the snow, and his first thought is to buy a third candy bar, even after overhearing that the last ticket was already found. No worries, Charlie. You've got a family of 7 in a one-room shack, eating cabbage water for every meal. But you go right ahead and buy some more chocolate.
Jeremy doesn't know anything about children. I'm going to reference the book here again. When Charlie finds this money in the snow, his thought is food, which makes sense given that he hasn't had proper meals. Maybe it's not the best way to spend this money, but it's definitely realistic for a kid like Charlie living in poverty.
This whole puppet carousel is the perfect metaphor for this movie. A fake plastic reproduction that's annoyingly loud and garish and ends up completely going down in flames.
None of the things you said just now are true. This sin just shows to me that you came into this movie with the thought in your head that it shouldn't exist because the original exists, and are never going to let that thought go. If you consider this movie as a standalone without even thinking the original existed, then you can find that there is a lot of things that this movie does well, like the amazing visuals that we see later, and a lot of these sins wouldn't be sins at all. You know what I suggest you do? I suggest you go read the book and watch the original movie. Then maybe you'll understand the reason for this movie being made. And that goes for anyone who just straight up says that this movie shouldn't exist because the original movie exists.
Tim Burton obviously decided the 1971 version of this story didn't have enough nightmare fuel.
I'll just let this comment handle this sin.
Isn't that just magnificent?
Where exactly did Wonka come from if the entrance to the factory is right in front of them? Also, wouldn't there be at least a murmur from the crowd behind the gate from seeing Wonka for the first time in ages?
It's possible that they don't recognize him. For one, they were focused on the show that was in front of them, and for another, he looks completely different to the way he did 15 years ago. He has a goofy haircut. So yeah, it's plausible that they don't recognize him.
Good morning, Starshine. The Earth says hello.
If you listen closely with the right kind of ears, somewhere in the middle of that line, you can hear the exact moment the world had had enough of Johnny Depp's nonsense.
The right kind of ears are the ears of a person who came into this movie with the thought in their head that this movie shouldn't exist because the original movie exists.
Also, the movie is deeply committed to us hating every single character that isn't named Bucket. I don't care how much you like good old Charlie. That is a lot of assholery to sit through.
Yeah, that's the point. They want us to hate these kids.
Me and you'll be in a world of imitation.
This sin annoys the hell out of me. It's completely unnecessary and in no way true. This is in no way imitation. Comparing this to the original film, it is improvement. Plus these visuals are fantastic and should be something that deserve a sin removal. Look, I actually don't care if you dislike this movie, but sinning these amazing visuals in this way is an offense and a half, and is getting 100 sins.
Would you like my meadow? Try some of my grass.
I am guessing there were many involved in this head trip of a movie that did indeed try some of Wonka's grass.
I don't even get how this is a sin.
You can eat the grass.
Of course you can.
But would you want to? They've been walking all over that.
Well, obviously they won't eat the grass that they've trodden on.
I understand they had to make these kids unlikable, but Tim Burton went way over the top with this. I mean, if you're going to remake this, why not give these characters a tiny bit of nuance instead of doubling down on the assholitude?
Again, we're supposed to hate them. Also, assholitude? That's at least the 4th made-up word in this video. Also, I wouldn't even call this movie a remake because it isn't, and it's not supposed to be. It's a newer adaptation of the same story that is more faithful to the book than the original was.
Oompa Loompas. Imported. Direct from Loompa Land.
What the f would Wonka have done if he didn't happen upon a sudden and conveniently subservient workforce? He'd already fired his entire staff, right?
Weren't you paying attention? Wonka had no intention of opening his factory. He closed it to everyone. The only reason he opened it is because he found the Oompa Loompas.
Movie wants us to believe that as fastidious and I don't know whatever's going on with Willy Wonka, he traveled through a f***ing jungle.
They give us a reason for this. Wonka traveled to a jungle because he wanted to find exotic new flavors for candy. And you play that a few seconds later. So yeah, you're not paying attention again.
Hornswogglers and snozwangers and those terrible wicked wangdoodles.
What are the nicknames for my penis? I'll take overactors named Johnny for 500, Alex.
Ew.
Sword swallowing.
This is not sword swallowing. This is sword swallowing.
I went to Loompa Land looking for exotic new flavors. Instead, I found the Oompa Loompas.
Man, I totally wouldn't have believed that these Oompa Loompas existed if I didn't have this completely necessary backstory.
I'm sure that if they didn't tell us that they existed through this backstory, you would have seen the fact that you don't believe that they existed.
Hey, little boy! My chocolate must be untouched by human hands.
That doesn't seem like a great marketing strategy.
Jeremy says something random and adds a sin for it.
Also, why the hell didn't Wonka tell them that from the beginning? There was one fucking rule.
Later you sin the fact that he planned this, so maybe that's why? Also, even if he didn't plan this, wouldn't it be just common sense not to touch this chocolate? He uses this chocolate for confectionery items that he makes. So yeah, it would just be common sense not to touch the chocolate from the river.
Why do all the Oompa Loompas look the same? Why are they miniature humans? Where did they find their love for musical theater? Why are they wearing full-body latex uniforms? And why do they write songs like a 5th grader trying to figure out what rhymes with poop?
Questions galore. Add 10 sins.
Why do all the Oompa Loompas look the same?
Because they are all voiced by Deep Roy.
Why are they miniature humans?
Because that's the way they are. Wonka said earlier that they are real people. They're just smaller than regular people.
Did they find their love for musical theater?
We find out through the flashback that the Oompa Loompas craved the cocoa bean and had ceremonies, so that's probably where they found their love of musical theatre.
Why are they wearing full-body latex uniforms?
Those are obviously given to them by Wonka.
And why do they write songs like a 5th grader trying to figure out what rhymes with poop?
They're not trying to find words that rhyme with poop. They're trying to find words that rhyme with gloop, and I think you know that. Also, the song is basically following the book. Also, there are only 2 words in the entire song that rhyme with poop, which are gloop and nincompoop.
Look, movie, you're the one that wanted to give the backstory for these guys, so now I need to know.
If you needed to know, you would have found out. Also, why do you need to know? There's nothing you're going to gain from knowing.
I know my high school physics, and I probably don't. When you have an overweight child object stuck in your vacuum, isn't the pressure above the blockage, not below? So why would it be spraying out like this all the way down here?
Yeah, I don't think you know your high school physics. I'm no physics expert either, but I have a possible explanation for this. Normally, chocolate flows up the pipe like this. However, Augustus is stuck in the pipe and is causing the chocolate to be pushed down back towards the river. This creates pressure below Augustus and causes the chocolate to spurt out below him. That's the reason why the chocolate is spurting out of the pipe below Augustus like this. I'm not sure if this is correct, but that's the explanation I'm going with.
So did the song and dance number fix the situation? Because the Oompa Loompas otherwise did jack.
When Jeremy says this, he excludes the part where he says, except follow the book.
I did say that all seemed rather rehearsed.
Like they knew it was gonna happen.
As if we needed more reasons to hate them, these snozwangers would be excellent at CinemaSins.
I don't care if we're supposed to hate them. Calling them snozwangers is a sin.
I want you to take Mrs. Gloop up to the fudge room, okay?
Is it just me, or does taking Mrs. Gloop up to the fudge room sound like a new euphemism for hitting the restroom?
It's just you, because those 2 things are completely unrelated. Also, your dirty-mindedness is definitely worth an additional sin.
Wakanda forever.
I'll remove a sin for Wakanda forever. But I'm immediately going to add a sin back on because you're referencing something that wouldn't exist in cinema for another 13 years after this movie was made.
Human hands can't touch the chocolate, but the bottom of the boat is fine. As we're told several times, the waterfall churning is what makes the chocolate unique. So this is definitely introducing an unnecessary variable.
I'm quite sure Wonka would make sure that the boat didn't contaminate the chocolate.
God, why does everything in this movie take forever to happen?
It's because they want us to appreciate all of this. If it happened too quickly, we wouldn't be able to appreciate all of this. Also, just to let you know, if everything happened too quickly, you would sin it as well.
Look, 1% of Tim Burton's imagination would kick the shit out of the rest of the world in an imagination battle. But this seems a little overboard, even for him. Sure, Wonka would have an extravagant boat, but wouldn't he pick something that fit better with the theme? What the does a dragon have to do with any of this?
Couple of sins here. First of all, this is not a dragon, it's a seahorse. Second of all, this is why the book matters. In the book, it was like a Viking boat that was pink in color, and Tim Burton took inspiration from that and created this boat. Third of all, this is overboard for Tim Burton? Yeah, no. If you can imagine being given a chocolate factory, then this is definitely not overboard for Tim Burton. Fourth of all, just because they're in a chocolate factory doesn't mean everything has to revolve around the theme of chocolate. That would just ruin the movie. And finally, if you're going to complain about this boat, then you have to suggest a better boat. And I'm sure you can't do that, so don't make this sin.
Movie's antagonist in a post-2000 rehash gets an origin story even though it doesn't need one and no one asked for one cliche.
I feel like the only reason this is a cliche is because you say it is. Also, speaking of things that didn't need to happen and no one asked for you to make this video and ruin this movie for the people who appreciate it. Also, he is not the antagonist.
Also, it's completely counterintuitive that this movie is called Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, when it's much more Wonka-centric than the first one. I know it's supposed to be a more faithful adaptation of the book.
Wait, what was that?
I know it's supposed to be a more faithful adaptation of the book.
You know it's supposed to be a more faithful adaptation of the book? Bullshit. The sins you've made so far throughout this video have suggested to me that you don't know that.
Also, why the f*** did Count Dooku Saruman let Willie go out trick-or-treating in the first place?
I feel like the answer to this question is quite obvious. Wonka's dad let him go trick-or-treating and then does this to show him the consequences of certain actions. In a way, he's trying to be a good parent and teach Willie life lessons. You could argue that he's not doing it in the best way, and I'd agree, but he has the right intentions nonetheless.
If your candy burns like this, and I hate to be the one to tell you this, either you got some bad candy or you're in a Tim Burton movie.
This sin makes no sense.
Whipped cream.
And we can add animal cruelty for the sake of a visual pun to the growing list of reasons this factory would have been shut down ages ago.
No one has been inside the factory for about 15 years. They probably don't know this is happening. How can you shut down a factory if you don't know that something is happening inside the factory? You just can't do that. Here's one sin off for not sinning the tunnel right scene. I appreciate that.
These are everlasting gobstoppers. You can suck on it all year, and it'll never get any smaller.
Also known as the everlasting choke hazard.
You do realize that you can just take out the gobstopper whenever you want it, right?
That is one stretchy sweatsuit. Someone call Bruce Banner's stylist, because I think we found the material for his next outfit.
The reason her clothes didn't rip is because the blueberry juice spilled out onto her clothes and affected them as well. And yes, I know that's not specifically stated in the movie, but if you watch the transformation scene closely, you can see that her clothes turned blue, indicating that they're being affected as well. Also, you did not need to say the second part of that sin, and I honestly could have done without it. Oh, you know what, what I should say given the sins that you've been making throughout this video is that you said the second part of that sin even though you didn't need to and no one asked you to.
I swear to the great gobstopper in the sky, the music in this movie makes the music in the Lorax look like Hamilton by comparison.
I'm going to say that these songs are at least better than the ones in the original. In the original, they were extremely repetitive and predictable. These are just much better and much more consistent with the book.
Regardless of how exaggerated her look is, that's still Violet's body. The Oompa Loompas could be doing some serious damage by jumping on it.
Maybe, but do you think they really care? I know I don't.
It's a special prize if you gets it.
The best kind of prize is a surprise.
The problem with Johnny Depp's portrayal is that it takes the beautiful, beleaguered, but eccentric frustration of Gene Wilder's Wonka and turns it into nothing more than a case of a sociopath with severe arrested development. A take which steals all the joy of Wonka finding someone to finally take over the factory, and instead just makes us want to alert the proper authorities.
Okay, I won't lie, the first few times that I watched this movie, I didn't like Willy Wonka's character. He definitely doesn't have the same charm that Gene Wilder does, but this is a more realistic take on the character. Wonka has separated himself from society for about 15 years. He has lost his fashion sense and has grown socially awkward. So yeah, while this version of Wonka might not be the same as the original, this is more realistic than Gene Wilder.
I think that one's got a bad nut.
That's why we nicknamed him Lance.
How is being nicknamed Lance and getting a bad nut related? Also, if you found this out, then I'm annoyed about the fact that you didn't find out that all the Oompa Loompas are voiced by Deep Roy.
I'm sorry, darling. Mr. Wonka's being unreasonable.
Okay, if there's anything in this movie that should have been worth a sin removal, it's this.
Little girl?
Geez, this movie's like watching a slow-speed car chase after popping a couple Valium.
Again, like I said last time, if everything happened too quickly, you would sin it as well.
It's always fun to see a kid's movie turn into a straight horror film. Seriously, bring on Squirrel Spearia. At least it would be interesting.
Saying that this movie is uninteresting.
For the sole purpose of this visual gag, Wonka was able to procure an overlarge steak from Looney Tunes land.
You said it yourself. It's a visual gag.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Fudge Mountain.
Is it just me, or does Welcome to Fudge Mountain sound like a euphemism for, you know what, maybe this whole movie is a euphemism for taking a dump?
Once again, it's just you. And I'm going to add an extra 5 sins for your dirty-mindedness.
Hello, Doris.
So the only female Oompa Loompas at the factory work in the front office? I knew Wonka was crazy, but sexist too?
You know, this may not be a female Oompa Loompa. It could just be a male Oompa Loompa in female's clothing with a female name.
Candy doesn't have to have a point. That's why it's candy.
Nice try, Mr. Burton. You're not covering up all your nonsensical bull that easily. Your movie still has to have an engaging story.
I can't believe this guy actually just said that this movie doesn't have an engaging story.
I want to pick a room.
Go ahead.
Even if we go by the assumption that Wonka set all this up ahead of time, there are several things that still have to fall into place. Augustus has to be left on his own and start drinking out of and fall into the river. Violet has to take the gum bait, which might be the easiest one, but it still has to go exactly as planned. Veruca has to be interested enough in the squirrels to go down and get herself thrown down the chute. And Mike has to ask to pick a room, it happens to be the TV room, and he has to get the idea to transport himself. Wouldn't it be easier to just get them all in the factory, have them decide who's the last man standing, like the Joker did in The Dark Knight?
Okay, I kind of agree with you when you say that Wonka might have set all of this up, but what you suggested would not work. By Wonka doing this, he's trying to teach the kids that are rotten, aka everyone except Charlie, a lesson and target their faults. And by doing that, he's trying to find out who's worthy to take over his factory.
Cool, you invented teleportation, and also apparently levitation? How is this Johnny Depp's ego-sized candy bar floating? Well,
One sin for describing the candy bar as the same size as Johnny Depp's ego.
Well, Mike, I think Mr. Wonka knows what he's talking about.
really? Mr. TV can say that with a straight face?
Well, Mr. TV probably figures that Wonka knows more about this technology than he does because Wonka has invented this technology. If Wonka says that it's a bad idea to transport a human through this machine, then it probably is. And it turns out that Mr. Wonka is right because afterwards, Mike TV is very small.
What are you talking about?
Little known fact, Warner Brothers originally hired Edgar Wright to direct this sequence, but in a different way due to creative differences.
I'm going to say that this is just a fact and not a sin.
Charlie's the only one left now.
You mean you're the only one?
Yes.
I don't blame Wonka for not realizing this, because I sure as hell forgot Charlie was part of this movie.
Really? Then I'm also going to guess you forgot the title of the movie.
We mustn't dilly or dally because we have an enormous number of things to do before the day's out. But luckily for us,
We have the great glass elevator to speed things along.
I wish the creators of this movie had a glass elevator then, because this movie took so little time and had so much that was interesting. Sorry, strike all of that. Reverse it.
God damn it, another sin that annoys me. Here's another 25 sins. Also, this guy accidentally says movie instead of video, and no, I'm not joking. This movie was highly appreciated, and while it's not as appreciated as the original was, it definitely proves that what this guy said is not true. So it would only make sense that this guy made a mistake with what he said.
Amazing to think that 12 years before this, Steven Spielberg made us believe dinosaurs were walking on the earth, but Tim Burton can't make us believe that a little girl is doing flips down some stairs.
If it was a regular girl, fine, I'd agree with you. But this girl has been juiced and stretched. That's the reason I'm going with for her being able to do flips down a flight of stairs.
Also, it's great to get confirmation that the kids are okay, and the only residual issue they'll have to deal with is their horribly mutilated bodies.
How is this a sin? This is just a fact.
You got some Star Wars in my Willy Wonka movie.
Here's a sin for sinning the glass elevator flying through the sky.
I want a flying glass elevator.
What proper young Brit would say elevator? It's a lift, dear Veruca. You want a flying glass lift.
I don't think anyone apart from you cares about the fact that she said elevator instead of lift. We all knew what she meant, and just because you're from Britain doesn't mean you can't say elevator. I live in Australia where we call them lifts, but that doesn't mean we don't sometimes call them elevators. Also, I don't think you're a person that can really complain about her saying elevator instead of lift. Not after you called a seahorse a dragon earlier.
you must be the boys' parents?
Yeah, that.
All right, that manufactured and unnecessary Wonka backstory still hasn't been resolved. Guess we've got another 15 minutes of Fudge Mountain to wade through.
He describes what happens in this movie as Fudge Mountain, which is completely wrong.
I had the strangest revelation.
Me, there's still time for another f***ing flashback.
Yeah, but unlike the previous 3 flashbacks that we've seen, this flashback is actually relevant to the story.
Who would watch over them after I was gone? I realized in that moment.
I must find a hair.
Hey, movie, we'll handle the ham-handed puns over here, damn it. You stink.
If you're going to make puns yourself, don't complain about puns in movies.
Dinner, Willie. Yes, please.
Man, this movie wraps up more cleanly and wholesome than a f***ing episode of Growing Pains.
I hate that you sin this ending. This ending is absolutely great.
Smell like peanuts. I love peanuts.
Holy Grandma Georgina's lucid. Did Wonka also invent the cure for dementia?
Why do you keep assuming things? This is just another assumption.
They built an exact replica of their whole house in the factory. What kind of sense does that make? And don't give me that cheap bullshit about how candy doesn't even have to make sense. It's their domicile.
Okay, I agree with you when you say it doesn't make sense for them to build an exact replica of their house inside the factory, but this does have some meaning. By building their house inside the factory, it shows that they have a special connection with Wonka and consider him to be a part of their family. While this doesn't make sense, it does have some meaning, and I think it makes for a good ending. One thing that is satisfying about this video is that this movie has less sins than the original movie does, and I don't even care that the sin video for this movie came out 2 years before the sin video for the original. It makes me satisfied that this movie is the better version of the story. CinemaSins has just earned himself a sin removal. It's time for a bonus round. I add a sin every time this guy makes a sin that I believe would not be a sin if this was the only Charlie and the Chocolate Factory movie.
This movie exists.
That was a genius.
If he can do the we've seen so far, I think the word Grandpa Joe is looking for is wizard, or based on the way Depp plays the character, possibly Satan? This whole puppet carousel is the perfect metaphor for this movie. A fake plastic reproduction that's annoyingly loud and garish and ends up completely going down in flames. Tim Burton obviously decided the 1971 version of this story didn't have enough nightmare fuel.
Good morning, starshine. The Earth says hello.
If you listen closely with the right kind of ears, somewhere in the middle of that line, you can hear the exact moment the world had had enough of Johnny Depp's nonsense. Me and you'll be in a world of imitation. I understand they had to make these kids unlikable, but Tim Burton went way over the top with this. I mean, if you're gonna remake this, why not give these characters a tiny bit of nuance instead of doubling down on the assholeitude?
They take Mrs. Gloop up to the fudge room, okay?
Is it just me, or does taking Mrs. Gloop up to the fudge room sound like a new euphemism for hitting the restroom? 1% of Tim Burton's imagination would kick the shit out of the rest of the world in an imagination battle. But this seems a little overboard, even for him. Sure, Wonka would have an extravagant boat, but wouldn't he pick something that fit better with the theme? What the does a dragon have to do with any of this? The movie's antagonist in a post-2000 rehash gets an origin story even though it doesn't need one and no one asked for one cliche. Also, it's completely counterintuitive that this movie is called Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, when it's much more Wonka-centric than the first one. I know it's supposed to be a more faithful adaptation of the book, but you know how we feel about that around here. I swear to the great gobstopper in the sky, the music in this movie makes the music in the Lorax look like Hamilton by comparison.
Special prize if he gets it.
The best kind of prize is a surprise.
The problem with Johnny Depp's portrayal is that it takes the beautiful, beleaguered, but eccentric frustration of Gene Wilder's Wonka and turns it into nothing more than a case of a sociopath with severe arrested development. A take which steals all the joy of Wonka finding someone to finally take over the factory, and instead just makes us want to alert the proper authorities.
Little girl?
Geez, this movie's like watching a slow-speed car chase after popping a couple Valium. It's always fun to see a kid's movie turn into a straight horror film. Seriously, bring on Squirrel Spearia. At least it would be interesting.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Fudge Mountain.
Is it just me, or does Welcome to Fudge Mountain sound like a euphemism for, you know what, maybe this whole movie is a euphemism for taking a dump?
Candy doesn't have to have a point. That's why it's candy.
Nice try, Mr. Burton. You're not covering up all your nonsensical bullshit that easily. Your movie still has to have an engaging story. Cool, you invented teleportation. And also, apparently, levitation? How is this Johnny Depp's ego-sized candy bar floating?
Well, we mustn't dilly or dally, because we have an enormous number of things to do before the day's out. But luckily for us,
We have the great glass elevator to speed things along.
I wish the creators of this movie had a glass elevator then, because this movie took so little time and had so much that was interesting. Sorry, strike all of that. Reverse it. It's amazing.
You must be the boys'
parents?
Yeah, that.
All right, that manufactured and unnecessary Wonka backstory still hasn't been resolved. Guess we've got another 15 minutes of Fudge Mountain to wade through.